The assassination of RFK was filled with so much chaos and confusion that even some of his own children still don't buy the official story. Here's what still doesn't add up decades later. According to official findings, Robert F. Kennedy's assassin was Sirhan Sirhan, a Jerusalem-born Palestinian with Jordanian citizenship. When he was 12, his family immigrated to the United States, and he grew up in Pasadena, California. He was reportedly critical of the Israeli state, a feeling that only intensified in 1967 when Israel's victory against an alliance of Arab states gave it control over additional territories in the region. During his trial, Sirhan said he shot Kennedy because of the senator's support for Israel. Unfortunately for Sirhan, Kennedy's death didn't exactly do very much to advance Palestinian goals. With Kennedy no longer in the running, the Democrat presidential candidate of 1968 was Hubert H. Humphrey, who lost the general election to Richard Nixon. Then, in 1973, when stalled negotiations over the fallout of the 1967 war led Egypt and Syria to attack Israel on Yom Kippur, Nixon's government launched an enormous airlift of supplies and arms to Israel. This led to an eventual Israeli victory that saw the Jewish state capture even more lands from its neighbors. While the Sinai Peninsula was eventually returned to Egypt, the Golan Heights, West Bank, and Gaza Strip remain under Israeli control to this day. Since the assassination of William McKinley in 1901, the United States Secret Service has been tasked with protecting the president and other important government officials. So it may seem bizarre that Robert Kennedy didn't have Secret Service protection on the night he was killed. After all, he was campaigning to be the presidential candidate of a major party, and his own brother was a president who had been assassinated just a few years earlier. Beginning in 1965, former presidents, as well as their wives, widows, and children, were pulled under the umbrella of Secret Service protection. But presidential candidates were yet to be given the same treatment. RFK's death shattered this oversight, and since 1968, Secret Service protection has indeed been extended to major presidential candidates.
The Secret Service detail grew exponentially.
How many shots were fired might sound like a simple question. When it comes to RFK's assassination, the standard answer is 8, as Sirhan Sirhan's revolver held that many bullets. 3 of them hit Kennedy, with a 4th passing through the shoulder pad of his coat. 5 other people were injured non-fatally, which is consistent with 8 shots being fired. So how is it then that 14 bullets were reportedly found in the vicinity? Trade union activist Paul Schrade survived a head wound during the attack, and he agreed with an acoustics expert who analyzed the tape of the assassination and identified 13 shots. However, it's important to note that other people only hear 8 on the tape. A woman screaming on the recording complicates the analysis, though, as does the fact that the position of the recorder relative to Kennedy and Sirhan is not known. Conspiracy theories about RFK's assassination generally take for granted that Sirhan Sirhan didn't act alone. You do need more than one person for a conspiracy, after all. One figure who frequently pops up in discussions about Sirhan's possible handler is a woman in a polka-dot dress. That may sound like quite the bold fashion choice for someone involved in a political conspiracy, but then again, murdering a sitting senator is hardly a job for the faint of heart. Various witnesses reported seeing a young woman in a dotted dress talking to Sirhan, although more specific details about the dress and the woman's hair color vary between witnesses. Some of these accounts claim that she spoke to a man in a foreign language, stood near Sirhan and possibly talked to him, or that she even said, "We shot him." Alleged sightings of this woman are rendered more confusing by the presence of Kennedy campaign worker Valerie Schult, who was wearing a dotted dress. So whether witnesses saw Schult, another polka-dot woman, or both will likely never be known definitively. It's a common detail in assassination conspiracy theories. There was more than one shooter. According to this hypothesis, Sirhan Sirhan indeed fired the 8 shots in his revolver, but those that killed the senator actually came from another weapon wielded by a second attacker. Witnesses, including Paul Schrade, have stated that they heard shots coming from behind Kennedy, which is not where Sirhan was positioned. Meanwhile, another witness named Nina Rhodes Hughes was behind Sirhan, and she heard shots both from where he was and from another direction.
When you have an experience like that, it's burnt in your memory forever.
However, it's worth noting that the fact sound waves bounce and echo means that brief sounds like gunshots are hard for the human ear to locate accurately. But it's also worth noting that the audio recording features pairs of double shots too close together for a gun like Sirhan's to produce, even under ideal conditions. And then there's the fact that the doctors who operated on Kennedy noted that he was shot in the back and from below at close range, even though Sirhan was in front of him. However, that can possibly be explained by the fact that Kennedy turned and that Sirhan is only 5 feet 5 inches tall. Fingers have been pointed at a security guard who stood behind Kennedy during the attack, who was a supporter of third-party presidential candidate George Wallace. However, that guard died in 2019. It's a dramatic theory, but one that surfaces again and again. Was Sirhan brainwashed or maybe even hypnotized? While he has confessed and explained his motives in court, he has also consistently claimed he doesn't remember the shooting. According to the brainwashing theory, he was a sacrificial distraction to conceal the real perpetrator and motivation. Attorney William Pepper argued at a 2011 parole hearing that Sirhan was essentially brainwashed to shoot Kennedy. Pepper also stated that he believed that he knew who was behind the brainwashing, though he didn't reveal who that was. This tactic was part of a try-everything approach that also involved references to the second gunman, and claimed that Sirhan was remorseful for a crime that he ostensibly didn't remember.
I was worried about saving my own butt from execution.
None of it stuck, though, as Sirhan was not granted parole, and in 2016, a judge formally dismissed the hypnosis theory. A reasonable observer might look at the mess around the second shooter and brainwashing theories and ask what the ballistics evidence says. Well, as it turns out, that's also a bit of a mess. Sirhan's attorneys at his original trial consulted a ballistics expert named William Harper, who wrote in an affidavit that markings on a bullet recovered from Kennedy's neck did not match a bullet that struck an injured bystander. But when pressed by reporters in 1974, Harper said that the differences weren't significant enough to conclusively prove that the bullets came from different guns. Meanwhile, crime scene investigator Dwayne Wolfer testified at the trial that Kennedy's bullets and the bystander bullets did match. There was so much confusion over the ballistics evidence that in 1975, a Los Angeles judge convened another group of experts. They fired new test bullets from the Sirhan gun and said that they did not match the crime scene bullets, but that the 3 preserved crime scene bullets matched each other. This would mean that they'd been fired from the same weapon, but not Sirhan's revolver. A total of 3 bullets in Kennedy and 5 in survivors accounted for every shot the Sirhan gun could have held. On-site observers noted nearby door frames that bore bullet hole-like damage, which would mean that there were even more shots. However, Wolfer discounted the interpretation of these as bullet holes, and the frames were discarded after the first trial, making their re-examination basically impossible. In 2010, the Los Angeles Police Department prepared an exhibit of artifacts related to notorious cases for display at a Las Vegas conference of murder investigators. Among the items on display were the shirt, jacket, and tie that RFK was wearing when he was shot. An LAPD spokesman argued for the artifacts' value as teaching tools, though the exhibit still drew criticism from the victims' families. The Kennedys in particular were not exactly convinced by the police department's justification, and complaints from the family quickly led to the clothing being removed from public display. In 2021, then 77-year-old Sirhan was almost paroled. That was his 16th attempt after 53 years of incarceration. He convinced the panel that he presented no future threat to the public and that he was sufficiently rehabilitated. If released, he planned to live with his brother, thereby indicating both family support and a plan for stability. Sirhan's bid had some surprising supporters, including Kennedy's sons Douglas and Robert Jr., as well as Paul Schrade. Douglas spoke movingly of forgiveness, while Robert Jr. and Schrade have argued that Sirhan did not fire the fatal shots, and the parole board ultimately recommended parole.
There's strong evidence of a second gunman.
However, parole was opposed by 6 of RFK's other children, as well as his widow, Ethel, who penned a group letter arguing against release. They found a sympathetic ear in California Governor Gavin Newsom, who exercised his veto power to reverse the board's decision and continue Sirhan's imprisonment. Then, in 2023, the same board that had recommended release in 2021 declined to do so again. The members of the board gave no public comment on the decision, which is standard practice.
He created a heinous crime, and he has done very, very little to rehabilitate himself.
On the night of the assassination, RFK was at Los Angeles' Ambassador Hotel for a victory party to celebrate winning California's Democratic primary. When it became clear that the state was breaking for him, he descended from the room where he'd been watching returns and passed through the hotel kitchen to a ballroom where he addressed an excited crowd. Afterwards, he intended to go to a press conference in another room, cutting through the kitchen again. On the way, he encountered Sirhan. But why exactly was Kennedy routed through the kitchen? He was shot in the pantry, which is not the natural habitat of super-famous politicians. The ballroom was very crowded with excited guests whose candidate had just won a major contest, so dodging the crowd made sense. However, the ostensible shortcut around the crowd was full of staff members interested in meeting Kennedy, who took the time to greet them. Indeed, he was shaking hands with a busboy when the first shot was fired. In the wake of the Martin Luther King assassination just a couple of months earlier, it seems optimistic to the point of naivete to think that Kennedy would be completely safe on this path. Stranger still is how Sirhan managed to place himself in the senator's path, especially considering that he admitted that he was very drunk. If it wasn't an enormous surprise for Kennedy to retreat through the kitchen, it also wasn't meticulously planned. Ultimately, this fatal encounter represented the worst luck possible. RFK was, of course, not the only member of his family who was assassinated, nor was his the only Kennedy assassination to raise more questions than answers. So it's worth noting that the Warren Commission investigating the murder of John F. Kennedy never received any testimony from Robert Kennedy. He had a say in the commission's makeup, but was unwilling to participate further. He refused to read the completed report, but after being briefed on the matter and counseled by his brother Ted, he stated publicly that he stood behind the commission's findings, including that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone gunman that day in Dallas. But rumors that RFK was privately unsatisfied have persisted, and he certainly wouldn't be the only one who felt that way. A 2007 book by journalist David Talbot, titled Brothers: The Hidden History of the Kennedy Years, states that RFK continued to quietly investigate the circumstances of his brother's assassination in the following years. According to Talbot, RFK believed that a domestic conspiracy had carried out the murder and intended to press the issue if and when he was elected president. Instead, he endured the same tragic fate as his brother and never got that chance.